The most important thing is that this guy named Miguel Connor left a review that's on the cover of the book. So, that's all you really need to know.
Indeed. And
well, I liked what you said, though. I mean, we were talking about this before we came on the air here. You said in your review it was a rewarding and useful map for the hero's journey. And I thought that really just kind of drilled down into what was essential about the book, is that the book is about the hero's journey. I explicitly used this motif to talk about what it means to be in this place, wherever and whenever it is, and what it means to strive to get out of this place, whatever that means. So I appreciate your acumen in being able to discern what was going on in this book, because there is a lot of information packed into a relatively short volume.
There is indeed, yeah, and what I like about it too is, you offer the map, but you also provide the exercises. A lot of people will tell us what the problem is, and that's fine. Reality is very brittle, and we need to understand that, and we need to understand that we must go on a hero's journey and know ourselves and what our purpose is and what our gift is to the universe, but they don't tell you how to do it, right, Saul? You actually provide, these are the options that will work for you, and these are the different paths. And, as make up your own damn mind what you want to do, but here they are on the table if you wish to follow this path.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. When we talk about the Library of Alexandria and kind of the modern iteration of that, with all of the podcasts that are going on and this proliferation of information, on the one hand, I think it's very positive, and it gets people to think on different wavelengths and different directions, to open up, to awaken, to empower themselves very often. On the other hand, I feel like so much of what's going on is this compartmentalization on steroids, where it's a niche inside a niche inside a niche. And so finally we're going to get to where we're talking about the fleas at the bottom of the columns of the Egyptian pyramids, and it becomes more and more meaningless as we drill down. I remember this phenomenon when I was in graduate school. This was happening decades ago. People were writing dissertations on the most obscure, meaningless topics you can imagine, and I see the same thing playing out today in Podcastolandia, frankly. And so what I set out to do in this book is to say, well, okay, we could talk about different permutations and theories of reality all day long, but let's drill down into what I think is going on here, what I think it takes to wake up to that fact, whatever it is, and then the steps that the pragmatic, practical steps we can utilize to increase our energy, our awareness, and our chances of actually flying this chicken coop.
Very true. In fact, that was one of my questions, or one of my notes here. You talk about, we're just talking about how everybody's got to create content or go down this rabbit hole, and today is the next big thing, but we got to tie into all the other big theories of conspiracy and psychology and politics. But you talk about that simplicity is integral or important in the hero's journey. As it's paraphrasing, it's a non-negotiable requirement for undertaking the inner hero's journey and moving beyond the mind control of the dragon. We can get into the dragon. So I guess the question is, how do you keep it simple? I mean, I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, they always said, keep it simple, because we create all these scenarios and grand designs and excuses. At the end of the day, it was just a bunch of excuses. And they always said, keep it simple, not cinco. What's your advice on keeping it simple, especially with all this information?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it opens up a lot of different topics in the book. One thing I'll say is that there's this shamanic concept that as you increase your power and center yourself more and more, you learn less and you learn to forget. It's essentially what you're doing, and you are letting go of information because so much of it is useless, and it attaches to parts of your psyche and your behavior that just that keep you stuck in a certain rut, a mental kind of dead end. And so a lot of what I'm proposing is that we don't need all of this information. We don't need all of these kind of top-heavy information heads debating this and that. We need people acting, and what I mean by that is going internal, going on the inner hero's journey in order to get out of here alive. So you're going in to get out, out through the outdoor, sort of a Led Zeppelin riff.
I got it.
There, right. So that's the whole premise, and the things that one can begin doing to go on this hero's journey include evaluating where your time is wasted. Where is your energy diverted into things that don't serve you? Where are you being depleted? Where are you a hamster on the wheel? Where are you jogging on the treadmill? And begin to just do the shamanic, the beautiful shamanic act of not doing. Just step away from things that are dragging you down and see how you feel. It's that simple, really, to start this whole process. There's nothing complicated about it. There's nothing you have to learn. You just have to be willing to do nothing if it takes that. I have a whole chapter on the benefits of procrastination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that. Maybe share with the audience a little bit about a procrastination, because today it's people assume procrastinating is like a poison and a terrible look in society. But tell us why it's different, or how can you leverage it for your benefit?
Well, in the context of this discussion, if you're simplifying your life, and I write about Thoreau, I write about Peace Pilgrim, people really took this idea of simplification to an extreme and were able to live extremely memorable, I think, meaningful lives that positively influenced many, many people, and even like historical outcomes, like Thoreau's theory of nonviolence and civil disobedience was a great inspiration for Gandhi, who used it to help free India, and to some extent anyway, from British colonialism. So this is a big deal, right? That can actually utilize simplicity to find solutions that come to us. And one of the ways we can allow that to happen is to not do things, and to allow ourselves to sit in that still space and procrastinate if necessary, if you want to call it that. Brenda Euland, she wrote a book on writing years and years ago that is still a classic. I think it's called On Writing, but I don't remember right off the top of my head. In any case, she coined a term, moodling. She says, what you need to learn to do is moodle. And this is basically letting your noodle wander and let things present themselves to you. And what will happen is your creativity will skyrocket when you do this, and you get off of the fast track and the go mentality.
Very true. Yeah, the soul has the answers. And I think another one, too, that is important is your idea of, and I am guilty of this, Soul, is the idea of busyness, that it can be a negative thing. And again, I'm guilty of this. I'll do stuff like, I got to do this. Well, I did answer 4 emails and I fill the cat bowl and this, I'll do all this busy stuff instead of, the big project, or the idea I need to go into the room and meditate, just to make myself feel better. So busyness is also a danger in our society, in our very busy society.
Right. I spell it busyness. Obviously, this is also related to the concept of having a business where you stay busy doing something. Maybe it's to make money, maybe it's not. But in this case, your busyness is a sign typically of being decentered and needing to find your silence, needing to find your stillness. Really, people, it seems to me, automatically assume that stillness and silence are somehow weak or less than, and yet they are amazingly powerful. Charles de Gaulle, the French president back in the 1950s, he said that silence was the most powerful weapon in the world. So I have a whole chapter where I get into silence and how we can use it to set boundaries, to resolve conflict, to get ourselves out of negative situations or harmful situations. I mean, there's so much to be said for silence, and when you combine it with the power of silence, when you combine that with the kind of simplification that we were talking about, that is an amazing recipe for beginning to pool more power. And when I say power, I really mean, pick your term, but it's chi, it's prana, it's kundalini, it's orgone, torsion, scalar, it's mojo, it's consciousness, it's the imagination. Ultimately, is what I believe it is. And this process of simplifying and going into stillness allows you to begin just recuperating all of this energy that is constantly being dispersed on purpose in the matrix. The matrix is designed to disperse this energy because it's being harvested. This is the energy of the imagination, the energy of consciousness, the energy of our attention, and it's constantly being harvested for other purposes than our own.
Well said indeed. And I always like this saying I read many years ago in monasteries. It said, do not disturb the silence unless you can improve it. And the older I get, the more I realize I can't improve it. I really can't. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in today, where you're almost forced to give an opinion or your insight or something like that. And we can get into the whole matrix control system, but I wanted to bring in Graham. Graham, what do you do to alleviate or manage as a researcher and somebody who's pretty plugged into what's going on in the world to manage the vast storms of information and keep yourself centered and not overwhelmed and just take it as it goes? What skills do you have or tricks?
I was going to say, as far as that goes, a lot of it's just lifetime of experience. Your intuition tells you which is important and which isn't, and follow that trail until your intuition tells you to abandon it. As far as what you're saying about the busyness, I use what I call a two-list system, where it's like I focus on what can I impact today versus what I can't impact today. And then I make two lists. And what I can impact today becomes my to-do list. And the other one, every time I think about it, I kind of metaphorically give myself a little kick in the butt to stop thinking about it. Because I can't do anything about that today, so why don't I do something that I can do something about? So that's kind of my methodology, Meg.
Yeah, that's a good one. What you can control and what you can't control. So, but I think that's one of the central themes of your book, isn't it, Saul? Is the idea that even though we might want to detach and not give our energy to these beings and the system they've created, but we all are important and can make a difference. I think there's a part where you write, we're more than capable of waving our wands over the manifest world and making its madness disappear. But first, we have to realize that we're born wizards, each and every one of us. There are no muggles here. So your central message is that we all can be wizards or hobbits. We all can change the course of history.
Yeah, I don't know about hobbits. Certainly wizards, although I do love The Hobbit and I love Tolkien. But the Harry Potter reference is I use a lot of pop cultural references in the book to just make it seem relevant to today, and I also combine those with lots of references to classical literature and scholarship and that kind of thing. So, yes, that's absolutely my message: is that we all have the same capability to increase our personal power to such an extent that we can perform miracles.
For sure. But that's the key. I think a lot of the problems we have today is people feel hopeless because the old ways don't work. I see people that if they post 20 times on Facebook against whatever political party they hate, it's going to work. Or if they write their congressman 20 times, it's going to work. Or if they go march. I mean, there are systems that don't seem to work anymore. And I hear it in their voices. They seem to be very hopeless. And I think your book offers a way where you can regain your power, right? Part of it is, again, go inward, find your inner magic, and express to the world in a world that make a difference. I mean, is that it, or what else?
Well, there's methodology to it. There are probably many ways of doing what I'm describing if you catalog different approaches to so-called enlightenment across the globe, right? Or the plane, or whatever this is. But what I'm describing is a specific consciousness technology that has been referred to as inner alchemy, and there are specific techniques that you can engage in that are the doings of this book. So if you think about the book being roughly divided into two parts, unofficially, one is the not doings, and we could cover some other not doings.
Sure.
We did mention simplification, we did mention silence, procrastination. Then there are the doings, and the main things that I recommend that people consider doing involve consciously, purposely reclaiming our energy that we've lost to past and even theoretical future timeline situations where we've actually been traumatized and that has bled out our energy. So you can go and recuperate that using shamanic techniques such as recapitulation or some of the energy absorption and reabsorption techniques that I described that are associated with inner alchemy, or sometimes you could even make a connection to more like Eastern internal alchemy, because there is certainly a connection. But what I'm describing is more of a Western alchemical tradition of inner alchemy, where you are learning to build your power by projecting your consciousness into the past or the future. You can even project it into the present if you're having, let's say, an argument with somebody. You can draw in the energy that's being loosed out of you right then and there, and you will witness miracles if you can summon the chutzpah to do this, because you will stop the argument in its tracks. It is an amazing phenomenon. It is the ultimate conflict resolution, because the conflict can only happen if part of the energy fueling it is coming from you. And when you take that back in, you basically withdraw your consent for the argument to exist. So imagine going back into your past and doing a kind of inventory of your life. This is a process that you can do for weeks and months and years. You can revisit things. You can do it in a haphazard way, whatever presents itself, or you can do it in order. But you learn how to project that consciousness back to the time when you experienced the trauma or the loss, whatever we're looking at, and there's a way of drawing that energy back into your body, and then taking that energy and moving it down into your solar plexus area, and then packing it very tightly in that area with your intention, using your willpower. And as you do that, what you're actually beginning to accomplish is the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. It's not some little Harry Potter rock that grants immortality to the bearer. It is something that anyone can create inside their body. It's a concentration of your life force, basically.
And this,
as you develop that, then that can empower or power up your ability to broadcast or project your consciousness, and then you get better at drawing in the energy, which then feeds your ability to broadcast your consciousness, and so on and so forth. As you become like the Ouroboros, the serpent consuming its own tail, you're just growing and growing and growing through this process.
Very cool. Yeah, talk about becoming sovereign again. And this is similar. Of course, you mentioned Jung and so forth. This is similar to integrating your complexes, integrating and understanding and integrating your shadow and all these work. I mean, all these mystics, so they kind of say the same thing with different language. I mean, it's this is a perennial wisdom, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I do write about shadow work, the shadow self. I also write about the deeper shadow that is involved in this process. But what I would say that makes this different from a lot of things that I've read, even in Jung's work, is that this is not really a mental process. This is back to the simplification and getting out of the over-intellectualization that we're experiencing as a culture that is literally ossifying our tissues as we sit in front of our computers consuming useless information, okay? And I know this because another thing that I do is I teach a certain kind of fascia work where you can decompress and release your fascia, and people are just becoming frozen. Their bodies are just freezing up, and that's contributing to very rapid aging and lots of conditions having to do with deterioration that are unfortunate and unnecessary, in my opinion. So you're actually doing something very specific to heal your trauma, and it doesn't matter whether you understand it. That's the thing. I mean, you might understand it, but you might not understand it, if you want to distinguish between those terms a little bit. What I'm trying to say, to kind of break it down, is that you are paying attention to the movement of energy into your feelings, your internal sense of the energy that was lost. As you do that, you do get better at visualizing what happened, or at least feeling it very intensely, and then you're able to draw that back in. But it is not in any way your responsibility to understand some of the shit you went through to benefit from this technique.
Interesting. No, I was going to say, one of the following up on the whole perennialism idea, it sounds to me like you're exploring your own version of that universal truth. And one of the, I'm curious how much you see echoes in what you've gone through and what you've theorized with, like, the old mythological phoenix, or especially Castaneda's eagle. I hear a lot of Castaneda echoed in your stuff, and I don't know if he was an influence or just he walked a parallel path with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Very nested question, pun intended, I guess, with the eagle.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
I write about Castaneda a fair amount in this book. So, I think I cite 5 or 6 of his books. I mentioned Magical Passes, lots of different. And the recapitulation is out of Castaneda. And I mentioned his work and Taisha Abelar's work and the way they taught the recapitulation. And I have a few tweaks and suggestions that I've been able to implement with my own practice of recapitulation, which is basically breathing in the energy that you lost in usually past circumstances. So it's related to the energy reabsorption, but it's not exactly the same. And I suggest that energy reabsorption is much more powerful than recapitulation. Because it has a final step that has to do with the packing, basically, and the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, so that it allows you to kind of use different visualization and breathing techniques to draw in this energy. But then what do you do with the energy? Well, you've got to put it somewhere, or it's going to get taken again, or you're just going to dissipate it. You're going to kind of piss it away, because that's what we do, unless we have a system for containing and warehousing this stuff. So I'm definitely suggesting there's more to it than just reabsorbing it. And in both cases, I don't think anyone's asking the person recapitulating or reabsorbing to understand what happened necessarily. In fact, that just seems irrelevant, really, to have an intellectual understanding, when what really matters is the primal, quote-unquote, reality of that movement of energy that was lost, that's yours. So it's up to you to go get it and pull it back into your system. And when you're creating the Philosopher's Stone, in essence, what you're doing is creating a facsimile of yourself in your body, of your energy. It is you on a multidimensional, greatly expanded level. And in terms of the Phoenix, obviously I created something called the Phoenix Center for Regenetics. The Phoenix has been with me for decades, this very important figure, and I've written about it and theorized about it. But there is a stage of the alchemical process on the other side of death. We could talk about what that means, when you have an opportunity to become the Phoenix and fly past the eagle.
Fascinating. Yeah, let's talk about the idea of death and getting to the other side. I know that's an important theme, and of course, a very important theme in shamanism in general.
Yeah, I know it's really hard for some people to talk about this. And you know, it can be painful and very triggering, and I apologize if that's the case. And I suggest that it's the case to some extent because our culture doesn't want us really looking at that with any balance and any mental health. It wants us to just freak out over death and either ignore it or make up fairy tales about what happens after death and call it religion. So that's my 2 cents. But in terms of the phenomenon of death, there does appear to be a kind of line drawn in the sand in this construct, the Matrix, that we supposedly can't go beyond intact, and that's death, right? So that's the party line. And we hear lines like or sayings like, the only certainties in life are death and taxes, and all of this is just absolutely ingrained in us. And yet all of our mythologies and even religions are just replete with figures who go beyond death, who die and come back, who can come and go, transcendent moments. I say sometimes it's a kind of transcendent immanence where there's this great embodiment that happens. This happens all the time, all over the world. So it's fascinating to me that on the one hand, when us plebes talk about this phenomenon, we got to pay the taxes and die, but the gods, they can actually live forever, right? So the hero's journey is to become a demigod or a god, right, where you get to live forever, basically. And there's a methodology around doing that. You can get out of here, you can build up your power enough so that you can actually choose your death in a conscious way. You can choose your moment of leaving this construct, of blowing this popsicle stand. And when you do that, you can then step into the facsimile body that you've created. It is associated with the Philosopher's Stone, and it's also called the dream body. You step into the dream body, and it's a body that you have created with the power of your attention and your ability to project your consciousness, and you've put basically energy into creating an egregore of yourself. Now, having said this, I believe you yourself, you are an egregore. We are egregores. There are only egregores. I don't believe in a real anywhere. I believe that we're in a dream, and that all things are levels of a dream, and that even when you get all the way past the eagle and you're at the central sun, the eagle at the center of the galaxy, whatever that is, that's just a dreaming. We're talking about the dreaming God. Just dreaming all of this into existence, using maybe you have the primal force of creation that's flowing through that and is manifesting in kind of the cosmic principle of something like Shakti or something like that. Okay, whatever. Those are the mechanics of how it works. But the upshot is that all is a dream. That's how we can create, because we can create things when we learn how to lucid dream and that sort of thing. We can create extremely real phenomena, quote unquote real. So real that if you've ever had a very intense lucid dream, you might have woken up, in tears, shivering. You might be having an orgasm. These things can just affect your body very, very intensely. And that's as real as it gets. So I suggest that this dream body is capable of having much more intense and subtle and powerful experiences than even our physical body in this construct.
Well said, and I would agree. Yeah, it reminds me of the Neoplatonism, the idea of Okama, the astral body. And the Gnostics talk about that too. I don't think they gave it a fancy name, but they just said preparing for the shamanistic journey, you will get this sort of different body that you can take through the levels of reality, levels of consciousness.
I mean,
so you would say
diamond body, light body, rainbow.
Yeah, that's it.
Thousands and thousands of names for this thing. It seems to be. I mean,
the Buddhist
thousands, but it does seem like there are so many names cross-culturally. I wrote about those in Conscious Healing years ago, and it's always fascinated me that that people who supposedly had no contact with each other, who had different languages, different customs, different religions and mythologies, ended up telling the same stories about where we are and how we get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. Same. The entering the timeline of universals and into the world of archetypes and myths, and these are very similar stories. When you mean shamanistic, I know that word gets thrown around. What do you mean by it, Saul?
You mean in terms of the techniques I was mentioning earlier?
Yeah, you say shamanistic.
Well, specifically, recapitulation was a technique that was supposedly taught to Castaneda by his teacher, Don Juan Matus, who a lot of people think was just a figment of Castaneda's imagination. And I always say this: fact or fiction, who cares? Everything is a figment of the imagination, including your most objective concepts. Ultimately,
mm-hmm.
There was a recent little interview where I said something like it was like subjective mind is creating that objective mindset, keeping it from seeing the subjectivity of its objectivity.
Love it. Yeah, exactly.
Really, I'm very specifically referring to something that was taught in that lineage of shamanism.
Mm-hmm.
And another version of that it has been written about by an author named Sergio Magana in The Toltec Secret. He writes about the Tol lineage of Mesoamerican shamanism, which is not the same thing as the Toltec. They are apparently kind of parallel lines. And so he had his own teachers who went back supposedly generation upon generation and, were bringing through or transmitting all of this very old consciousness technology for doing the types of things we're talking about and learning how to lucid dream, which he calls blossom dreaming. And he has his own way of doing recapitulation, which is where you use masks and you put a mask on and you stand in front of the mirror and you tell your life story to your mask face.
Love it.
And you do it 30 minutes a day for 30 days. And the funny thing is that as you do this, the story becomes more and more ridiculous and absurd, and you begin to detach from it, and eventually, very often, you just run out of anything to say before the 30 days are up, and you can just stand in silence in front of the mirror, completely detached from your face and your past and who you are, and it allows you in a kind of psychological way to start your life over again, to reinvent yourself. It's very... And of course, it can bring in a lot of energy. I feel that in terms of this discussion, where we're talking about amassing personal power, that the recapitulation method of going back into the past and breathing back in your trauma and your power, that's the more effective way to do what I'm describing. But I would highly recommend people get Magana's book and experiment with these masks. I got a couple of the Commedia dell'arte masks, the sad and happy face.
Yeah.
And I would alternate between these masks. And, one day I would do like the happy face and the next day I would do the sad face. And it was really trippy. I have to say it was actually trippy at times.
I bet. As long as you didn't say Candyman 3 times, you'll be fine, so.
Or red rum.
Yeah, of course, red rum, yes, that's another one. So, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, for the audience, it's all in his book, and these things, I've seen them work, and they are part of a tradition that will help you if you need healing and anchoring into a better reality and finding a better version of yourself. But switching it around to the quote-unquote bad guys, and we did talk about this on when we discussed this in December. But tell us about the dragon and the matrix control system. What are these concepts that you bring in the book?
Well, I know the matrix control system, I believe, is a phrase that Tom Montauk, that he coined. And he and I are actually going to be doing an interview or a chat sometime in May. So that'll be
cool. I love his work. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I cite his work in the book. And I should probably back up a little bit and let people know that my previous nonfiction book that you and I discussed on this channel was called The World, Cult, and You. And it was basically a warm-up to Get Out of Here Alive in many ways. And in that book, I theorized that the world is a series of kind of interconnected and nested cults that are designed to control people's minds, to govern the mente, and to harvest our energy, that we're basically sheeple on a loose farm. Now, having said that, I also went to great lengths to let people know that I was not suggesting that we are in some kind of soul trap necessarily, or that we are helpless here, or that that we're on a kind of rinse and repeat recycling.
Right.
It's my understanding of all of that is rather different from what you see in the mainstream, and I would suggest that the fact that those ideas are so mainstream should give you pause. I'm going to leave it there. So, where was I going with that? Well, I went back to the dragon. So, in The World, Cult, and You, I talked about the notion that there is like a great parasite that is feeding on human energy, and this would be the archons. This is the demiurge, or the whole archontic Borgian collective, however you want to look at that. So the hive mind that is feeding on people's energy. But when I got to Get Out of Here Alive, I was working with the hero's journey motif, and I needed a different metaphor for what this thing is, or how to describe it. So I chose the dragon. The dragon is the guardian to the cave of our shadow. It's the guardian to the point at the edge of the construct where we can actually leave the construct. We have to face and defeat the dragon on our hero's journey to get out of here alive. That's the whole principle. And literally, I suggest that the dragon is... I cite a wonderful article by a friend and colleague of mine, Brendan Murphy, who wrote about archons in Stranger Things. It's something I republished on my Substack. And so he basically compares this dragon to the mind flayer in Stranger Things. So that's one way of looking at it, this Dungeons and Dragons character. Also, you could think of it as maybe being something like Cthulhu. The H.P. Lovecraft old one who sort of feeds on human energy. I know that John Kreiter, who has been a great influence and inspiration for my work and this book, he theorizes that we're looking at a being from the dream world, from the Nahual outside of the Tonal where we live, that has basically found this bright little planet full of our energy, and it's set up this Lush farm, this mind flayer, but that in some at least subtle body sense, like with its subtle body, its astral body, something like that, it literally is down in our oceans. And I cite Jules Verne, the French author in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, who suggests that, we don't really know what's down there. There could be, multi-thousand-year-old creatures in this environment that we just don't even know anything about, really. So, and that hasn't changed all that much, even though that book is kind of old. So I've entertained the possibility, as freaky as it may sound, that the Lord Archon is here and is actually down somewhere in the ocean, and and that's pretty wild to think about. So I know that there's more to say about this, but I don't want to monologue, because I'd like to segue and get into some of the ideas about the dragon, and kind of deconstruct some preconceptions around that. That
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, and you're right. 90% of the ocean has not been explored. Who knows what's there? Maybe it's Atlantis, like you said. Maybe these other forms of creatures that are there. With the Giza Pyramid there's so much more we are just discovering, but I think it's sort of a cosmic law. Again, going back to myths, whether you're talking about the Gnostics and the Archons, the Anunnaki, the Olympians, the Nephilim, and you find these in indigenous cultures in South America. Carlos Castaneda, his ideas of the predator and the flyer. I mean, this is cosmic and has been seen through all cultures, and it's probably true. I would say so, right? There are these beings coming in, and we're on the menu. Meat is back on the menu, back to the Lord of the Rings.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
Human luge is back on the menu.
That's right. Absolutely. I think this is an actual phenomenon, and when we're not allowed to talk about it in a calm, cool, and collected way, if people like freak out about it or they just go into total denial, it's very unproductive. But let's just assume this is what's going on, all right? It would explain the controlled chaos of the world, because the Archon, the dragon, would use this technique to destabilize human interactions and produce the emotional outbursts that give it its energy that it then feeds on.
Mm-hmm.
And these outbursts are also a loss to our ability to maintain our own consciousness at a certain level. So we get stupider the more that we're loosed,
mm-hmm.
and we then fall into the place of reason where we're trapped in this empirical materialistic box, and we don't realize that we're just being extremely dumb and not being able to see what's going on, and we make fun of other people who can see what's going on. It's wild. I mean, it's really, really wild. It's brilliant. It's diabolically brilliant. The dragon is so brilliant. I honor that brilliance because it is amazing. And I also believe, Miguel, that it's really the dragon is our teacher here in many ways, in the sense that this is like a dojo. I mean, people use the classroom analogy. We could talk about that, but I like to think of it as a dojo, and it's a tough love dojo. It's like Morpheus gets Neo in that dojo and just kicks his ass until Neo can figure out how powerful he is and begin drawing back in his energy, if you want to, because I use the metaphor of the Matrix throughout this book, and that's what we're talking about. So really, if we can stop being such victims and just, lamenting the fact that we have this predator in our midst that we can't do anything about, and we're just going to reincarnate and recycle back in and all of that, just hogwash, really, then we can begin to empower ourselves, because we can learn to start feeding on the energy of the dragon. Other than the earth itself, it's the most powerful energy and most abundant energy source we have available to us. And we can actually learn to feed on its intent. And then we can purify that energy, and we can use it to create our own Philosopher's Stone that will be like a nuclear generator inside of us that will allow us to fly this coop and turn into the Phoenix and sail through eternity.
Oh, beautifully said. And here, I mean, as Castaneda said, there is a predator in our